Draft control. What is it? How does it work? When are you going to use it? And how to use it? Hey everybody, and thanks for joining me. Tuesai Acres here. In today's video, I'm going to get right to the bottom of this draft control thing. I watched a bunch of videos and it actually left me with more questions than answers. I got some test jigs set up. I'm going to take you through how the actual components work. Now this is a Mahindra. Other tractors work a little bit differently, but the idea should be the same. Now really big tractors, they work a little bit differently, and I'll point that out as we're going. So stick around. I hope we can all figure this out together. Appreciate you watching. Let's get started. Hey everybody, so this is just a little postscript, next day video editing I'm doing right now. I forgot to mention this yesterday. When I was trying to learn about all this stuff, first thing I did was check my owner's manual, and even the manual is goofy. Here's a little photo of it, and if you read it here, it says, by mounting the lever forward, the depth control, or the depth increases, and by moving the lever backwards, the depth increases. So even the manual is confusing, or confused itself. Honestly, it's probably just a loss of translation from India to English, you know. So take it for what it's worth. You know, every manual is a little bit different. I mean, there's only two things in this entire manual that show anything about draft control. So really confusing, and hopefully everybody gets a little bit out of this today. All right, so in one of my previous videos, I was showing you the wood yard here. I cleared all of the trees and brush and everything, and this is about probably close to a half-acre parcel, approximately, give or take. It's hard to see just because I've been grading it so much, but there are low spots, high spots, low spots. The plan is to have implements, the dump truck, the plow truck, at least 60 to 100 face cord of lumber out here, firewood. And it's just, it needs to be more level than it is. And like I said, it's not too bad, and I could work with it, but I want it to be better. So right in here, there's a low spot, and up and down throughout the area, which again, you know, I could live with it, but my tractor has draft control. All right, so now that you know why I'm interested in this and why I was looking it up, let's talk about draft itself. What is draft? Just so I don't mess this up, the best definition I found is the total force parallel to the direction of travel that is required to pull the implement. All right, so in layman's terms, how much force it takes to pull an implement. All right, pretty simple. Like a draft horse, right? It's called a draft horse because it pulls. And honestly, it doesn't matter if it's in the ground implement or a rolling implement, it's still considered draft. All right, so now what is draft control? That's the tractor's ability to raise and lower the implement to control the force required to pull that implement. Now, generally speaking, that'd be used for, say, moldboard plows or bottom plows, same. Discs, cultivators, that kind of stuff, ground engaging implements. So I have the 7-foot York rake here, and I use it to do most of my grading. Whether it's the driveway or fields or whatnot, it doesn't matter. I do have a box blade with scare fires and all that, and I love that thing, but I generally speaking don't need that. Now, don't mistake draft control as depth control. Draft control uses depth control to control the amount of force required, but they're not the same. All right, now let's take a closer look at the actual components on the tractor to figure out how this thing works. Now, the draft control on this particular tractor uses the top link. Now, there's a bunch of the newer tractors, especially the bigger tractors, you know, 100 horse plus kind of things that you see in the big fields. They use a sensor at the bottom of the lower drag lengths here, and it's a push-pull sensor. So in that scenario, the more drag or, you know, draft imposed on the implement, it pulls out on these bottom links and makes it realize, you know, there's a computer and a sensor, and it tells it, hey, lift this thing, get rid of some of that load so that we're not dragging so much, right? On this style here, I think it's exactly opposite of that. Now, a bunch of the videos I watched talking about draft control using the top link style control say that when you're dragging the implement through the ground, it doesn't matter if it's a rake or a bottom plow or whatever, the force touching the ground is at the bottom down here. And if you think about it, these bottom pins down here swivel. They are not fixed. They can, the implement can pivot up and down. The top link is the only thing that keeps this implement from raising or lowering. These bottom links adjust the height. The top link adjusts the tilt of the implement, right? So if there's a force down here being applied that way, opposite of the tractor, you know, resisting the movement forward, it pulls back, it's going to want to pivot up. Oops, sorry about that. It's going to want to pivot that implement up. Well, the top link is the only thing that stops it from tilting up, and if it tries to tilt up, it pushes that top link in. Now, a bunch of the videos I watch say just the opposite. They're like, oh, no, when you drag, it's going to pull it down. No, the swivel right here. But I have a couple methods here. And this is what I was talking about with my test setup. So I have a block and tackle setup. I've rigged it to a 4x6 that I bolted into the bottom of the York rake here with an eye bolt and everything. So I've got a scale here in line. I've already tried it. I can get at least 400 pounds on it, and we'll see what happens. I've also got like a 10-foot chunk of angle iron down here. I'm going to clamp that onto the straight bar up here. I'm going to clamp it right here, and I'm going to lift up and lift down and see what this does once it gets engaged. All right, now for the rest of the components themselves, how it actually works, at least on this tractor. So this assembly right here, okay, this is a rocker assembly. It pivots by this pin way back here. This pin in this configuration it is right now, this pin makes this a fixed unit. So draft control can't even work. Now, to be perfectly honest, I don't know if this spring back here is a plunger or not. You know, if this pushes forward, does it actually push on that spring and actuate a valve inside of here? I don't know, because it also has this guy here. So if this plate were to push forward, it would push on this lever, pushing on this guy, going up and around. It would act on this setup here. Now there's a spring here. Now when I actuate the lever, I don't see much happening. So I'm going to climb up here right quick, and I will actuate that lever, and we can see, all right, that's in the full up position, full down position, full up, and that spring barely moves at all. See that lever moving there? So honestly, I don't know how this particular one works. Again, I don't know if it's that spring plunger down there. I don't know why my camera can't get around there. Let's see. Yeah, I have no idea, to tell you the truth, whether or not that's just a spring with a bushing, you know, and a shock absorber of some sort, or if that's the actual hydraulic valve and plunger assembly. However, just today I figured out that this pin here has to be in this elongated slot. Come on, get over there. This pin has to be in this elongated slot in order for this center assembly to be able to move separate of the mount. So this mount here is hard mounted. It's solid to the frame of the tractor. This inner piece, this inner assembly, can swivel on that pin down there if this pin is in this elongated slot. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this pin out, put it in the elongated slot, and then start our testing. All right, well, I was getting everything set up to run the test. I figured out 2 easier ways to go about doing this, and I figured out that the block and tackle I have set up is not strong enough. Neither was that 10-foot chunk of angle iron. I tried it and none of that worked. However, like I said, 2 other ways. Let me show you. All right, so the first way is exceedingly easy. We talked about this swivel plate or joint earlier. It's got the bar sticking out. When the top link is pushed forward, this sidebar here catches this lever. All right, so here's what happens. If it pushes on that lever going forward, watch what happens. Here's your lift bars. There it is. So I did swap my pin into that elongated hole. So now, acting as if you catch something in the ground, it tilts this forward, pushes the top link forward, pushes the swivel assembly forward. This sidebar catches the lever and pushes it, and boom, there it goes, lifts up. You can see that, hopefully. Let me zoom out and do it. Same thing. So that tells me that if I catch something in the ground, in order for draft control to work and release the pressure or the draft or the force, it has to tilt forward. So what we thought initially, it has to be the case. And I also found out by moving my draft control lever all the way to the down position, it takes a lot more of that force to engage the draft. So in this particular case with the Mahindra, this is a 6110, with the draft control lever full forward, it takes a lot more force raising up, you know, tilting forward, blah, 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 to engage the draft. As that lever is pulled back, little by little, it takes up some of that slack. It'll still do it. And then in the full revert or back position, it's immediate. All right, so there's one more test I want to try. I'm going to lower this unit. And if you can see, let me give you an idea of what the setup looks like here. I'm parked on an incline towards a tree. Okay, so, and I blocked the bottom of the tractor or underneath the back tire, so it would raise it up just a little bit so that this pulling force was as down as possible, if that makes sense. You know, kind of simulating I catch something in the ground, whether it's a bottom plow, a disc, something pulling down on that implement. All right, so now, just to prove a point, I'm going to pull my top link pin right out. And then I'm going to put pressure on the bottom down there, pulling it away from the tractor, you know, simulating I'm pulling along and something grabs the bottom or it sinks deeper, catches deeper, whatever. Whatever the case is, you know, simulating a load. So now the top link is just sitting here. It's not hooked up. So now what I'm going to do is yank on this block and tackle. Now granted, it's only 400 pounds, which apparently is nothing for these tractors. And we're gonna see what direction this guy tips. If it tips forward, it 100%, that's how it works. I didn't see that and I couldn't. I'm gonna try again. Try to actually look while I'm doing this. Yep, it tipped forward. All right, so far we've covered what draft is and how draft works, at least on this particular tractor. I think most utility tractors and compact tractors, if they have draft, work generally the same way with the top link assembly of some sort. And you could look at your unit and just kind of figure out, you know, where the forces would act and how it would work. Now I'll touch real quickly on the when to use it, just because personally I don't do a lot of agricultural, you know, disking, plowing, tilling, that kind of stuff. However, you know, using it in those scenarios, you got to remember your position, your 3-point up and down lever, that sets your position, all right? And it alone sets that position. However, when you go through a divot up and down, as the front of the tractor goes up, that implement hanging off the back goes down. So it will get deeper and it will bite harder. Right? And now if you're on perfectly flat ground going through pretty average soil of some sort, it honestly doesn't matter. Your lower limit is set by the position selector. Now the draft control controls the force required. So if you're going along and it can't go any lower because you're on perfectly level ground, that's great. It's not going to dig any lower because it can't. But what will happen is it will cause a lot of extra force required to pull the implement along. You know, if you're going through loose sandy soil and all of a sudden you hit a rocky patch or hard soil, or whatever the case might be, clay, I don't know, it's going to bog down the tractor a little bit depending on, you know, what tractor you're in. So that's where draft control would come in if you're using it. And one thing I noticed here, this tractor has 3 slots for the top link, or 3 holes for the top link pin, and then that one elongated hole for the actual draft control usage, right? So if the draft control pin is in the elongated hole, then you're gonna be able to use draft control. Now those pins, the way they're located, the top pin has the most leverage available. It's the furthest away from the pivot point, so it's gonna take the least amount of force to move that, right? As you get closer to the pivot point, it's gonna take more pressure to overcome that spring pressure. I'm just gonna show y'all. All right, so as I tried saying before, we've got 3 positions for the top link pin, right? Now this unit here is the swivel unit. This is the swivel pin down here. This pin, if it's in the forward slot, will actually lock this unit in place because there's nowhere for it to go, right? It can't go forward and aft. And you can see that the pinhole on the inside is the same diameter as the pinhole on the outside. So if that pin is here, this swivel joint can't go anywhere. Now once you move your pin from there to this elongated slot, now this centerpiece has a little bit of wiggle room, right? So when the force pushes up and pushes in, it actuates your draft control. So if I'm up here, it's gonna take the least amount of force pushing forward against that spring pressure to actuate my draft control. As you move further down, it's gonna take more force to push that spring in to actuate your draft control. And according to a couple videos that I saw, which makes sense to me the way it would work, is the heavier implements imply more force, right? So you would want your heavier implements in the middle to the bottom slots. That being, you know, maybe a 3-bottom plow or a 6 or 8 foot disc or something along those lines that are both heavy and can imply a lot of force if they get caught on something. Now my York rake just rides along the top of the ground and it does drag a decent amount of dirt with it, but overall it's pretty light and it doesn't really dig per se into the ground. It's not like a bottom plow that literally is pointed forward down at an angle that can actually get pulled into the ground and cause a lot of force up here. All right, so for my York rake here, I'm gonna leave it in that center pin just because that's where it is and I wanna see how it works. I'm gonna start with the lever all the way to the highest position. That way it's as reactive as possible because I want it to, at least initially, that's my thought process, and we'll see where it goes from here. So I'm just thinking about it, and I really don't know if this is gonna help me for leveling. Because for leveling, you want to grab more of the high spots and less of the low spots, which is exactly opposite of the forces required to operate draft control, if that makes sense. So if I don't want to skim I do want to skim the tops. I'm gonna have to think about it for a minute, I'll be back. All right, so here's the real test. I contemplated this with a local expert here, and we decided that we're not sure, all right? So like I was saying earlier, I honestly, the draft control seems to work exactly opposite of what I want for leveling purposes. I'm thinking if I go over a hump, that high spot is where I want to grab, which is going to be more force, which more force for draft control equals raising it up, right? So what I'm thinking right now is to put the draft control in the highest force mode, you know, like the draft control lever at least halfway, if not 3/4 way forward, almost all the way forward. That way it takes longer, more force. That way, as I go over a high spot, the back side will take a second to build up. It'll keep grabbing more and more and more. So hopefully it will, you know, that delay will grab most of the high spot. And then by the time it catches that huge chunk of, you know, dirt or whatever, dirt, rocks, roots, by the time it catches that and starts sensing that, I'll be over that and leveled back out and it will pull that away. That's what I'm hoping. And the other thing I was thinking about too is that the position selector, you know, the up down for your 3-point, that does set your lowest position. When you set that, that's the lowest those arms will go, right? And if you drop it all the way, that's basically floating, okay? So if it's floating, it can drop with all the weight of the implement. Now, my tractor and most compacts, most utility tractors, you can't use the 3-point to push down. You drop it all the way, it's not pushing down, it's only the weight of the implement pushing down at that point. However, it can go really low. So if you go over a hill and you need that implement to stay as low as possible as you're coming up over the hill, it can do that. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set the position selector all the way down, and then the draft control, medium to medium low at this point, to require more force to react. That way I can collect more of the high spots, and hopefully by the time I scrape off the high spot, it'll be a big chunk that I'm pulling and level it out. So we'll see how it works. All right, so I'm gonna get to it. I got a GoPro mounted on the back seat of the tractor. I'll clip that footage in as we go. All right, and here we go. I made half a loop so far, maybe one loop. I don't really see it acting much, but it's hard to see from my point of view. So my one pass, I don't know. It's just really tough for me to tell. I see it moving, but I don't know if that's just because of the terrain or if it's actually lifting it or not. I don't know. But I do think that I should probably move that top link to the upper position to be more reactive. And honestly, I don't know if it's doing anything. And I've tried the draft already all the way up and all the way down, and it doesn't seem to be doing crap. See, now honestly I think I'm just making it worse. It's at a certain position, which means every time the front end of the tractor comes up, like just now, the back end of the tractor goes down. I'm coming up on a high spot. Front end just went up, back end went down, the implement went down. Front end goes over the high spot, and the implement doesn't even hardly touch the high spot. I suppose just a smidge there at the edge of the high spot, which is not what I want. And then I end up dragging out of the low spot, which is definitely not what I want. That's with the draft control lever to the highest, most sensitive position, and the position sensor exactly where it should be. All right, I just saw a piece of glass I gotta go get. I may have disappeared a couple old tube TVs a few years back, and I'll be picking up this stuff for probably the next decade. And since I stopped, I'm gonna go ahead and see if I can't get this in the more sensitive position, that top hole. All right, now the top link is in the top pin position. See if that makes a difference. I'm gonna do one more pass across the camera here, and then we'll do final thoughts. Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm probably just gonna have to do that manually. How you use it, all right? So in my particular case, I have my position selector, right? So that's all the way down. I just dropped it. All right. So this sets your lowest level that the implement will drop, you know, and again, that will change depending on the angle of the tractor in relationship to the ground. If the front end comes up, the back, or if the front end comes up, the back end will go down, and vice versa. If the front end goes down, the back end will come up, right? So this will set your minimum position, but let's just say you have it all the way down. Now, in my case, with this tractor, I have this draft control, and it shows you right here. Oh, come on, focus. There we go. It shows you right here, the little arrow going down, right? And then a little arrow coming up. I think you could call that up, right? So with my draft control lever all the way back, it's in its most sensitive position, and it will lift that rear end anytime it feels a resistance to the force, right? So that anytime there's more force applied to the implement, raising that implement up and the top link forward, blah, blah, blah. So, and it's incremental all the way down. It's a kind of a linear thing. All the way forward like this takes the most amount of force applied to the implement. So let's say you have a 2 bottom plow, 3 bottom plow, whatever. You have this guy all the way forward. It will wait until that bottom plow really digs in harder. You grab a root or something, then it will go ahead and lift that implement. If it's back here, you know, it might only drop an extra inch or so, or let's say the front end goes up, so the implement drops into the ground a little further, then it'll take less of that force to lift that implement out of the ground. So it's kind of like depth control, but it actually is using a depth control to adjust the force implied on the tractor, the pulling force the tractor is feeling. All right, so we started off with 4 questions. What is draft? How does draft control work? When do you use draft control? And how do you use draft control? And I'm pretty sure we covered all of that. In my particular application with the trying to level this out, I'm gonna have to keep tinkering with it, and it's getting late, and honestly, I'm kind of tired of it for today, but I'll get back into it. I would really appreciate anybody's input that has experience with leveling ground. I don't have a bulldozer. I'm not gonna get a bulldozer. I'm just trying to do the best I can with what I have. I can barely afford the tractor I already have, right? So going out and buying extra equipment, this is all about learning how to use the equipment you have to do the best job you can with it. It's not that I can't raise and lower the implement, and honestly, I did most of this with that function as is. I'm learning about the draft control right now. I was just frustrated that I couldn't find more information, more detailed information. So hopefully everybody got a little bit more out of this compared to the other stuff that's out there right now. I really would appreciate some feedback from some people that have been doing this a lot longer than me, you know, considering this is my first time. So thanks for watching, everybody. You know the drill. If you got any questions or comments, throw it down there in that little section. And when I figure out how to level this ground using draft control, I'll let everybody know with another video. Keep pulling on them bootstraps, and we'll catch you later.